Right, good afternoon everybody. We'll be kicking off now Planning Committee meeting number 227 on today, Thursday the 24th of November 2022 at 5:34 p.m. First of all, the committee would like to acknowledge the Wadawurrung people as the traditional owners of the land, waterways and skies in which we meet today. We pay our respects to the elders past and present, and we acknowledge all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander members of our greater Geelong community today. I'll now introduce the panel. And with us this evening, we have Councillor Mason, Councillor Asher, I'm Councillor Sullivan, we have Councillor Aiken, Councillor Maloney, and Councillor Nelson. Tonight, we have officers joining us: Joanne Van Slagren, Manager of City Development; John Rush, Coordinator, Statutory Planning; Shane Pritchard, Team Leader, Statutory Planning; and Julian Pollard, Senior Statutory Planner. Now, we have no apologies to be noted. I will call for declarations of conflict of interest. Are there any conflicts of interest to be noted by the panel? If any do arise throughout the meeting, please make them known. Do I need confirmation for minutes for the last committee meeting? So there's confirmation for the Planning Committee meeting that was held most recently. The minutes for the Planning Committee held on the 10th of November 2022 be confirmed. Can we have a mover? Councillor Asher, seconded. Councillor Mason. All those in favour? Everyone here was there, all good, thank you. That was enough to pass it. We do like to note that this meeting is also being live streamed, so people can view it from home or view this at a later date. Now, whilst the audience is not within the live stream camera and will not be in the live stream camera, questions asked will be a part of that recording, that audio recording. I'll now outline the procedure for how we will go forward on this. So the procedure for the hearing item this evening will be that the officers will present a brief summary of the written report to the panel. The panel then may ask questions of the officers about this. Then, after that, I will invite objectors or submitters to come forward and to detail their concerns to the committee, and each objector or submitter will be allocated a 3-minute time frame in which to do so. The panel may then ask questions of the person making their question or submission, and then they can return to the seats. Post that, the applicant will then be invited to respond to anything and to make a submission in their own right. They will have up to 10 minutes to do so as a combined effort. The panel will then ask questions, if they wish, of either the applicant or officers to clarify. So that way we get a reading summary. Public gets their turn, the applicant gets their turn, then the panel will discuss and I'll ask for a recommendation to be made. The decision of this committee will be the final decision of the council acting under delegated authority, and if anybody is aggrieved by the decision of this committee, they may appeal to the Victorian Civil and Administrative Tribunal in Melbourne, and our staff can assist with this process during office hours. With that, I think we'll move straight into the matters for consideration, which is PP 15782021, Planning Committee Report 2, and 4 Stevens Parade, Barwon Heads. Please.
Chair, this application is for the demolition of 2 existing double-storey dwellings, associated outbuildings and fencing, and the construction of a double-storey dwelling at 2 to 4 Stevens Parade and new fencing, and is a recommendation for support. So I'll go through the existing site conditions at the moment. If you could please refer to the feature and level survey plan or the design response plan, as well as the aerial image on page 13 of the Planning Committee report. What I'll do is I'll walk you through the plans to start with. So if you're looking at plan TP02, which is the design response plan, this section of Stevens Parade contains 4 dwellings. 3 of those are double-storey in design that abut the Barwon Heads Golf Club to the north. Approximately 120 metres north of the subject site is the golf club. To the northeast and northwest is also the golf course. Crown land is located to the south. It is moderately vegetated of predominantly native vegetation, and you've also got 13th Beach Road to the south of the subject sites, which has numerous lookouts located along the road, and the bluff is located 2.5 kilometres approximately to the east of the site. Now, if you look at the aerial image on page 13 of the Planning Committee report, there is an approximately 120 metre setback provided by part of the golf course from the 4 dwellings that sit at 2 to 8 Stevens Parade to the rest of the dwellings further west along Stevens Parade. This has generally created two distinct built forms of development along Stevens Parade, where development of dwellings in the western section of Stevens Parade are generally built to nestle within the landscape further back into the site, whilst this section of Stevens Parade, the built form is generally built closer to Stevens Parade, where it's easily viewed from Stevens Parade when you're looking upon the street. Back to Plan TPO2. The site at 2 Stevens Parade has been developed with a double-storey dwelling with the relevant setbacks to all property boundaries. If you look at the front setback, it is 5 metres. To the east, it is 8.3 metres. To the golf club, it's 8.9 and 5.6 to the west. There's a building height of approximately 7.6 metres maximum. There is a 1.6 metre high timber picket fence surrounding the boundary perimeter. There is mature vegetation located along the eastern side, facing Golf Links Road and along the northern rear boundary that abuts the Barwon Heads Golf Course. No planning permit was required for this development of this house. There is also an existing double-storey dwelling, if you look further west at 4 Stevens Parade, with a detached outbuilding constructed on the front boundary, whilst the double-storey dwelling is set back 5.9 metres from the front boundary and 1.6 metres to the western side boundary that abuts 6 Stevens Parade. The existing dwelling is approximately 7.5 metres in height, and the heights are taken from the ridge lines provided within the plans. A planning permit was approved at the above site in 2018 for the demolition of the existing dwelling and construction of a new double-storey dwelling that was approved with a maximum building height of 8.8 metres. The dwelling at 6 Stevens Parade is double-storey in design, with a detached double garage setback 2.43 metres from the front boundary and dwelling setback 11 metres. The dwelling has a maximum building height of approximately 9 metres. The dwelling at 8 to 10 Stevens Parade is a single-storey dwelling. Stevens Parade is a no-through gravel road in the southern section of Barwon Heads, which provides access to the dwellings located within Stevens Parade. If you drive along Stevens Parade, you're basically just going there to most likely visit someone within Stevens Parade. Zoning and the planning permit triggers. So if you please refer to page 11 of the Planning Committee report. Under the low-density residential zone, a permit is not required to construct a building or construct or carry out works associated with one dwelling or demolish a dwelling. There is no maximum building height under the provisions of the low-density residential zone and no garden area requirements. It is noted that the site would meet the garden area and maximum height requirements if it was located within a general residential zone or neighbourhood residential zone. Under the Heritage Overlay HO 1650, the Golf Links Heritage Area, a permit is required to demolish a dwelling, associated outbuildings and fencing. A permit is also required to develop a dwelling and fencing. Under the Bushfire Management Overlay, a permit is required to construct a dwelling. The application was referred to the CFA, who have no objection to the proposal from a bushfire perspective, subject to a condition relating to the relevant bushfire management plan being endorsed as part of a planning permit if one is issued. An application is exempt from notification for a single dwelling under the Bushfire Management Overlay. Therefore, notification was given under the Heritage Overlay only. It is noted that the plans submitted show a pool to the rear. A permit is not required for a domestic swimming pool if it cannot be seen from the street or public park. It is considered the proposal will not be seen from Stevens Parade or Golf Links Drive and the golf course, and is not considered a public park. Based on this and under the provisions of the overlay, no planning permit is required for the swimming pool. The plans also show tree removal. A planning permit is only required if the schedule for the Heritage Overlay has tree controls. The Golf Links Heritage Area has no tree controls, and therefore the removal of trees also does not require planning consent under the Heritage Overlay. As the subject site has a combined area under 4,000 square metres, it's 1,823 square metres combined, the provisions of clause 52.17, native vegetation, don't apply to the proposed tree removal. Neither dwelling has individual heritage significance. There are 2 dwellings that have individual significance along Stevens Parade. They're located at 8 to 10 Stevens Parade and 22 Stevens Parade. The Golf Links Heritage Overlay comprises of the properties at 2 up to 24 Stevens Parade, with number 6 Stevens Parade not located within the Heritage Overlay, so that's an outlier. The proposal. So please refer again to the demolition plan, which is 110. Note there that both dwellings are there are proposed to be removed, but you can see along the eastern boundary, along Golf Links Parade there, that the mature vegetation will be retained on site and part of the north-east corner as well as some in the northwest corner as well. Vegetation along the eastern boundary will be the development of a double-storey dwelling, which is L-shaped in design. If you move further on to TP 109, shows where we start with the development, which maintains the 5 metre front setback from Stevens Parade, extends the setback from Golf Links Road from 8.3 metres up to 12.7 metres, but reduces the setback to the golf course to the rear from 8.9 metres down to 6.1 metres, and increases the setback to the western boundary, which is the shared boundary with 6 Stevens Parade, from 1.65 metres up to 4.23 metres. The proposed dwelling will have a larger building footprint than is existing on site, which is approximately 520 square metres in area compared to approximately 500 square metres in area. They are relatively close in coverage, as the proposed development seeks a basement level over the 2 sites, and the basement level shown on TP 109. It will have a maximum 43 metres in length along the frontage of Stevens Parade, where the entire subject frontage width along for the subject site is 74 metres. As you can see from the plans, the dwelling will be constructed over 3 levels, with the basement level containing a 6-car garage, movie room, gymnasium, cellar, lounge and storeroom. The ground floor will contain 2 kitchens, living, study, rumpus and 2 internal undercover terrace areas. The upper level will contain all 7 bedrooms, each with their own separate ensuite, with 2 stairwells and a lift to provide access across all 3 levels. The dwelling will have a maximum building height of 8.6 metres. The dwelling will be constructed with a gabled colorbond roof, external walls finished in a light grey render, with the upper level slightly recessed to provide some articulation of the building, with large expanses of glazing along the front and rear elevations, which is the north and south. Public notification. Letters were sent out to the owners and occupiers with 2 signs placed on the site because it's a corner site. 45 objections were received, with recently the Barwon Heads Golf Club recently withdrawing their objection. The matters raised by objectors included: the development is inconsistent and unsympathetic to the existing neighbourhood and streetscape and is an overdevelopment of the site. The dwelling is a bulky structure that is not consistent with the Barwon Heads urban design framework in relation to its built form and existing character of Stevens Parade. The principle of development being the construction of a large dwelling is out of character with the heritage overlay in regards to the golf links area. The proposed dwelling will be a dominant feature within the landscape setting when viewed from the Bluff, 13th Beach Road and lookouts, the golf course and the golf club. The development is out of character with the existing development within Stevens Parade. The front setback needs to be greater to allow for greater landscaping opportunities. The proposed development for demolition is not sustainable for the environment, considering the dwelling at 2 Stevens Parade is approximately only 20 years old. The proposed dwelling and its bulky structure will impact on views to the Barwon Heads Golf Club. The proposal is not consistent with clause 1503(1)(s), as it fails to ensure development does not affect the significance of a heritage place, the golf club, due to its size and bulk. The proposed development is not consistent with the Ballerine Peninsula policy, as it presents as one single elongated building with no breaks in built form. The proposed development does not comply with the Marine and Coastal Act 2018, as it will be a dominant built form not sympathetic to the coastal surrounds of 13th Beach. The construction and demolition process will cause heavy vehicles to be parked illegally within Stevens Parade or Golf Links Road and provide potential traffic accidents, as it's difficult to see vehicles coming in either directions around the corner of Stevens Parade and Golf Links Road. So the response to the objections: as you can see from the objections listed, there's strong themes in relation to the built form of the proposed dwelling and how it fits in with the surrounding landscape and the wider landscape setting, and viewed from significant views and vistas within Barwon Heads. Now, what I've done is I've provided is a map showing of the overlays of the area, which I think might be the second last one on your. This point here. Yep. So I've provided this overlaid map of Barwon Heads in relation to the overlays that contain design elements for dwellings And as you can see there, we've got the Design Development Overlay Schedule 41 and 42 and the Significant Landscape Overlay 8. The subject site is one of the few properties within Barwon Heads that isn't subject to either one of these overlays. So you can see why there was a number of objections to this proposal, because most of the Barwon Heads is subject to these controls. Strategic Planning Department have no further plans to place a significant landscape overlay or design development overlay within this section of Stevens Parade after 2010 that changed the zoning from general residential zone to low density residential zone. If the design and development overlay and significant landscape were on the site, they would provide greater weight to a design response, as they would seek the following: seek to preserve and enhance significant landscape features, to promote the siting and design of buildings and works, including the choice of building materials that are responsive to the landscape character of the site. As there is no design and development overlay or significant landscape overlay located over the subject site, therefore the design policy for this site relates purely to the heritage overlay only. A number of objections related to the Barwon Heads Urban Design Framework 2003, as well as other literature which are not incorporated documents within the City of Greater Geelong Planning Scheme or reference documents within the Greater Geelong Planning Scheme. Therefore, little weight can be given to the Urban Design Framework objectives, and greater weight is placed on the Barwon Heads Structure Plan found within Clause 1103 6L01, which is the Bellarine Peninsula Barwon Heads policy, which seeks to rezone the land low density residential zone, which has already occurred. It is considered the proposed development complies with the structure plan. In regards to the off-site amenity impacts arising from the proposal is not subject to controls that invoke a res code assessment under Clause 54 of the Greater Geelong Planning Scheme. It is considered these provisions only apply to an application to construct a building or construct or carry out works associated with one dwelling on a lot under the provisions of a neighbourhood residential zone, a general residential zone, residential growth zone, mixed use zone or township zone, if the land is under 300 square metres in area, or a neighbourhood character overlay if the land is in a neighbourhood residential zone, general residential zone, residential growth zone, mixed use zone or township zone. As such, I cannot assess if the proposal complies with the various standards and objectives relating to Clause 54, such as visual bulk, overlooking and north-facing windows, etc., when assessing the application. In relation to the demolition works, the planning controls within the City of Greater Geelong do not provide the ability to retain a dwelling from being demolished for sustainability reasons. The application only triggers a planning permit under the Heritage Overlay and Bushfire Management Overlay. Therefore, an application can't be assessed against the neighbourhood character of Stevens Parade, but only from a heritage and bushfire perspective. In relation to the Marine and Coastal Act 2018 and its built form and height, there are numerous double-storey dwellings constructed to the height of the proposed dwelling, or even higher, that have not been refused within Stevens Parade under the Marine and Coastal Act. The Marine and Coastal Act also appears to only relate to Crown land and buildings located within Crown land. In relation to potential traffic impacts from the demolition and construction process of vehicles parking on Stevens Parade and Golf Links Road, this is not normally dealt with under a planning permit for a single dwelling, where it is anticipated all vehicles associated with either the demolition or the construction process will be parked on site or within designated parking spaces. There appears to be ample space on site to park the vehicles as it's nearly 1,823 square metres in the area. In relation to visually blocking the intersection, the fencing will need to meet building regulations to provide appropriate sightlines under the building permit stage if a permit's granted. Reasons to support. At issue is whether the proposed dwelling will have an adverse effect on the significance of the Golf Links heritage area and whether it is in keeping with the location, bulk, form and appearance of adjacent buildings and the Golf Links heritage area, as per the relevant guidelines within the Heritage Overlay. The proposal was assessed by Council's Heritage Advisor, Dr David Rowe, who is supportive of the application from a heritage perspective. Council's Heritage Advisor's full comments relating to the application are found on pages of 21 to 24 of the Planning Committee report. The following comments from Dr David Rowe were provided in relation from a heritage perspective. Overall, the gabled forms, height and construction accord with the significant characteristics of the heritage area as per the incorporated Golf Links design guidelines within the City of Greater Geelong Planning Scheme. And therefore, be considered a contemporary interpretation, yet the proposed dwelling is likely to have some additional bulk compared to the existing conditions, particularly from the view from the top of the golf course. This is not likely to cause an adverse effect on the significance of the heritage place, given the location of the proposed dwelling, the topography of the adjoining golf course, particularly when viewed from Golf Links Road outside the clubhouse, and the notable distance of the dwelling from the clubhouse, which is approximately 120 metres. There will be greater exposure of the dwelling when viewed from the eastern portion of the course, east of Golf Links Road, but the view from this location is considered to be less sensitive from a heritage perspective. There is no doubt the proposed dwelling is substantial in size. However, it is required to be assessed against the relevant planning controls of the City of Greater Geelong planning scheme and in relation to the Golf Links area and the bushfire management overlay. And under the provisions of both overlays, the proposal is consistent with the relevant decision guidelines, and therefore is respectfully requested that the application is supported, subject to the conditions placed within the Planning Committee report.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I'll now ask the panel if they have any questions about the summary for officers. Councillor Mason.
Thanks, Mayor Sullivan. Possibly got a couple of questions. Low density residential zone, that's what it's defined at, is that correct? I'm having difficulty in correlating that with 7 ensuite bedrooms and 6 car parking spots. Is this a residence, or is it a commercial operation, or is it a Airbnb, do you know, or is it just a residence?
Applied under the planning permit for a single dwelling, so that's how it's been assessed. If it's used for something else, then they'd require a permit for the use.
Thank you. And could you explain to me, please, how contemporary interpretation correlates, say, with a golf club and a Spanish hacienda type style with big arches front and back?
We relied heavily on our heritage advisors' advice from in terms of the design. Hip-roof form.
Could you speak in the microphone a little bit closer?
Sorry.
Thank you.
In terms of the hip-roof form and as well as the colour, our heritage advisor was satisfied from that perspective.
Thank you.
If I may, was it correct in saying that the golf course had an objection in at one point?
They have an objection, but they removed it approximately 3 weeks ago.
Do you know what reasons? Did they give any reasons for removal?
No, they didn't.
John?
We do have the applicant here. That might be a good question to put to them when they get their opportunity.
Panel doesn't have any further questions. I will now invite members of the audience, objectors or submitters to come forth and speak. We've got a couple who are pre-registered. Philip, I may ask you to come up first. That's great. Hi, Philip.
Well, thanks, Trent.
Excellent. You have 3 minutes at your leisure.
As representative of the Bar and Hedge Association and on behalf of over 200 members, I refer you to the Bar and Hedge submission prepared by Shelley Fanning from Coastal Planning, June 2022. The Planning Department of the City of Greater Geelong and the Council's Heritage Advisor appear to have, perhaps dismissed as a hard word, but certainly not taken a great deal of note of all of these planning scheme provisions in their deliberations. Many of these provisions are very subjective, things like coastal character, neighbourhood character and heritage place, often hard to define. They are important to the communities who live in the villages on the Bellarine. They are easily ignored, dismissed and derided as irrelevant by statutory bodies and developers. I quote just briefly from the BHA submission, there's a need to recognise, support and protect neighbourhood character, ensure that development does not adversely affect the significance of heritage places, whether the location, bulk, form or appearance of the proposed buildings will adversely affect the significance of the heritage place. Heritage overlay, HO 1650, Golf Links Heritage Area objectives seek to retain and enhance the open undulating links course with its rolling greens and sandy hillocks, etc. The Bellarine Peninsula objectives seek to preserve the individual character, identity and role of each Bellarine township, in particular in Bowen Heads, to protect the unique character of Bowen Heads as a coastal village, located within a sensitive environment and significant landscape settings, and ensure that new developments comply with the specified coastal character siting and design requirements. The City of Greater Geelong Heritage Advisor says, and I quote, which we've already heard, at issue is whether the proposed dwelling will have an adverse effect on the significance of the Golf Links Heritage Area, and whether it is in keeping with the location, bulk, form and appearance of adjacent buildings in the Golf Links Heritage Area. The Heritage Advisor then states that the proposed dwelling is likely to have some additional bulk compared to the existing conditions, particularly from the view at the top of the golf course. So he acknowledges that it's going to be bigger. There will be a greater exposure of the dwelling when viewed from the eastern portion of the course, but the view from this location is considered to be less sensitive. Surely, the whole site is incredibly visually sensitive within the public realm and warrants a design response that is sympathetic to the character of the area. The development of 2 to 4 Stevens Parade will create a home of massive form and bulk, probably the largest and most dominant private residence in Bowen Heads. The proposal fails to respond to the significant links course in the heritage area and may threaten future recognition as a links course and sets a precedent.
Thank you, Philip. Just remain there for a moment. Does anybody on the panel have questions for Philip? Thank you for your submission, Philip, or your objection. Thank you. On, please. On.
Excuse me. Well, thank you, Mayor Sullivan.
Please start at your leisure.
For over 20 years, Council's planning policy has sought to protect the unique character of Bowen Heads as a coastal village. Key elements of coastal character identified in the 2017 structure plan include dwellings that do not dominate the streetscape and which do not have a balanced landscape outcome due to the dominant built form viewed from the street, and simple material palettes with strong focus on timber and weatherboard. The planning policies, objectives and strategies for built environment and heritage in clause 15 of the planning scheme have not been adequately considered or addressed. The distinctive areas and landscape statement of planning policy states that development within Bowen Heads established residential areas will retain its existing low-scale coastal character, and also muted colours and materials will help preserve and enhance the coastal character. The proposed building adopts the same arched colonnade style of another building designed by the same architect in Hampden Road, Armidale. That's the document I've shown you. What may be considered acceptable in suburban Melbourne is unlike any building identified in the residential character studies of Bowen Heads as contributing to the identified and preferred coastal character of Bowen Heads. The proposed large, bulky, non-articulated two-storey building some 60 metres long, constructed over 2 lots, will dominate the Golf Links heritage area, particularly when viewed from the east and the coastal path. This is acknowledged by Council's heritage advisor, but dismissed as being a, quote, less sensitive, close quote, view. Also, the officer's report fails to consider and respond to the Marine Coastal Policy Clause 11.2, which he mentioned tonight, to design, locate and maintain buildings to avoid impacts on heritage sites and avoid dominant structures that are not sympathetic to the local heritage or character. I adopt the comments by Councillors Asher and Mason in rejecting a recent application of the need to keep the unique township feel and to draw a line and say no more. This application should be refused, but if Council decides to grant a permit, conditions should be imposed to 1. Require the applicant to submit a Cultural Heritage Management Plan approving the proposed significant ground disturbance caused by removal of sand to enable construction of the basement 6-car garage, movie theatre and other works pursuant to Regulation 53 of the Aboriginal Heritage Regulations 2018. 2. Require the applicant to construct and maintain at its cost during demolition and construction a protective fence to coastal Crown land adjacent to the site as approved by the Crown Land Manager. 3. Enter a construction management agreement to maintain safe vehicle and pedestrian access to Stevens Parade and the pedestrian path to 13th Beach Road at all times. And 4. Submit amended plans to incorporate an articulated building and roof design with a muted coloured palette to all external walls and roofing. I would also object to the granting of a demolition permit for the existing dwelling. The destruction of a luxury 5-bedroom, 4-bathroom, relatively new home sold for over $10 million 2 years ago is grossly wasteful and environmentally unsound. Thank you.
Thank you, Colin. One moment. Does the panel have any questions of Colin? If not,
Wondering why we've got this.
I was seeking to demonstrate that that is a building that has already been designed and built by the architect for a Melbourne address, suburban Melbourne property, which is...
Is this a single dwelling?
No, I'm not seeking to say that a multi-storey dwelling is the same thing. I'm referring to the colonnaded approach with arches and such like as a design concept which is now being suggested is appropriate for a coastal setting, unlike anything else in Barwon Heads.
Colin. So do you have a question, Jim?
Colin, did you make any attempts to consult with the developers?
No, we have not made any attempts, nor has the developer made any attempts, and I understand the developer has not made any attempts to consult with the objectors, as far as I know, and I think in the report it said that there was no consultation because there were so many objectors and they thought it was inappropriate, although I do understand that the developer met with the golf club representatives, but only the golf club representatives. And that has apparently resulted in that objection being withdrawn.
Thank you.
Graham, please. How are you, Graham?
I'm very well, thanks, at the moment. Thanks very much for the opportunity to address the Planning Committee. I draw your attention to the current Greater Geelong Planning Scheme and the current Built Environment and Heritage Policy, number 15, dated 10th of the 10th, 2022, as well as the Heritage Policy 15.03, dated 31st of the 7th, 2018, which includes Heritage Conservation 15.03.1-17, dated the 26th of October 2018, as well as 15.03-L1L, dated the 13th of the 10th, 22, I believe that the Planning Committee agenda documentation relating to the built environment and heritage policy heritage policy have not been properly considered in various reports made available to the Planning Committee and the objectors. As the decision on PP 1578 2021 has not been made by the committee, further consideration of the planning application should be suspended until the City of Greater Geelong's planning scheme current own policies are taken into account. I will make further comments below in relation to my original objection submissions and reviewing the applicant's submissions as well as reports on the agenda documents from various council officers. The redevelopment is an overdevelopment of the property and we're out of character with the golf links area close to it and is more in keeping with the Spanish-style house suited to Armadale Apartments. And if you look at the website from Robin Mills Architects and whatnot, the website also includes a statement that says a deep connection to the surrounding landscape is again contrary to the build character identified in the City of Greater Geelong's adopted Bowen Head Structure Plan 2017. The proposed new residence is not consistent with the Bowen Head Structure Plan adopted by the City of Greater Geelong. The City of Greater Geelong's residential character study, Bowen Head's Township Precinct 15, and finally the principles to be applied in the Bowen Heads Village identified in the final draft of the planning policy dated October 2022 from the Victorian State Government and the Department of Environment, Land, Water and Planning. The agricultural report, the original vegetation plan included replacement of removed vegetation with coastal tea tree, an environmental weed, as recognised in the City of Greater Geelong vegetation plan for the Bowen Heads Village Park Master Plan review in August 2012. And documented in the City of Greater Geelong's own vegetation management lists of vegetation dated December 2020. I assume it no longer appears in the current arboricultural report as a result of the unsolicited phone consultation with me by the applicant. The heritage impact statement by Bryce Worth, their series of information is listed on sources of information listed on page 2 in their report. Heritage and description starts on page 3. An earlier view dated 1936, which I obtained from the Victorian State Library and submitted by myself when I objected, confirmed that 2 and 4 Sturgeon's Parade did not exist at the stage in the original property. Under the heading description, page 4 describes that 2 Stephen Parade was built in 2004. This is not the case and is supported by objections submitted in a painting of 2004, painting B by art teacher Peter Rushfield, who was a past member and captain of the Bowen Heads Golf Club. The residence existed in 2 Stephen's Parade under the occupancy of 2 generations of the Lempriere family. Heading 6.0 development proposal from the architect states that the ground floor treatment requires features an arch colonnade and glazing. The glazing is a contravention of is contained with arch windows and is a contravention of the design principles of Heritage Overlay 1650 relating to windows. Fence
Right, Graham, I'll ask you to wrap up. We've gone over time a bit.
Sorry?
We've gone over time a bit. I'll ask you to wrap up, please.
Well, I'd like to table some documentation and table my written submission for further consideration that supports what I was going to say. I've got a copy of that. It relates to those various documents which are all identified.
So there's only one copy?
Yes, unfortunately.
In the meantime, Graham, one moment, please. In the meantime, does anybody have any questions for Graham? Thank you. If not, is there any other objectors or submitters here this evening who wish to make a statement? Not, I will now invite the applicant to come up and detail their application. Please. Good afternoon.
Good evening,
How are you? I'll get your name, sorry, if I may.
Michael Henderson.
You're Michael? Excellent. How are you, Michael?
Very good. I'm from Contour Town Planning, and with me tonight is the client and also the project architects. So a number of the questions put to councillors this evening, or council officers, will be able to accommodate pretty reasonably, I think, tonight. So with your consent, I'll commence. So as a start, thank you to the Planning Department's officer recommendation this evening, and also the detailed introduction and summary of the project. It was very beneficial to go through that process and for it to be methodically spelt out what we're here tonight to discuss. And given that, I think it's a really good way to start is probably what are the permit triggers, what are we here for? And we are here to, under an application under the Bushfire Management Overlay and the Heritage Overlay. Dealing with those two items initially, the application was referred to the CFA. They have supported the application subject to conditions. We have no issues with those conditions outlined. In terms of the heritage component, which is clearly the biggest point of contention this evening, we did submit a heritage impact statement by Bryce Rayworth as part of the application material. Bryce supported the application. That heritage impact statement was reviewed by Council's Heritage Officer. We received what was called a request for further information and referral comments from Council. We provided an updated response to Council's concerns. Subsequent review by Council's Heritage Officer was in support of the project on heritage grounds. So I think in dealing with, call it the two permit triggers, we've obtained support from the CFA and Council's Heritage Advisor. Notwithstanding, we are here to talk about what the proposal is as well, but to set the context from the permit triggers, I think was relevant. It is for the demolition of non-significant buildings, and as mentioned by council officers, there is an existing permit for demolition on the subject site for one of the properties. Furthermore, as was raised by also the council officer and objectors, the other building is only circa 20 years old. So neither building on site has been deemed as being of heritage significance by council. It is for a double-storey dwelling above a basement car park, and again, I can speak on behalf of the client here. It's not to operate as a commercial tenancy as raised by one of the councillors. It will be as a private residence. It will have a building height of 8.6 metres, and as correctly outlined by the council officer, that will be slightly higher than existing conditions. Despite it being higher, we can defer to the comments made by council and the officer report, and those comments by council's heritage advisor that yes, it's bigger, but that doesn't mean that it's unacceptable. And ultimately, council's planning department and heritage advisor has viewed it as being acceptable. The building is detached from all side boundaries. It accommodates a generous setback from the golf course versus existing conditions. It retains key vegetation on the subject site and a new landscaping palette. As part of the application, we did meet with the golf club, and we did provide matters of clarification in respect to the landscaping palette, and on that basis they withdrew their objection. It was cordial, positive, and it was respectful. Given the limited scope of the planning considerations, being the heritage overlay and the bushfire management overlay, we defer back to the planning officer's assessment that it is an acceptable outcome. I'm conscious of time, and the project architect is here as well. I haven't run the stopwatch, but is there still 3 or so minutes for the project architect to field any queries? Perfect. So given that, at this point, I'm happy to defer to questions of councillors from a planning point of view. Otherwise, I can bring in the project architect as well.
Please rotate and we'll save all questions till the end. Thank you.
Council officers, objectors, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak tonight. I think my responsibility is to explain the history and the purpose of the building. Paul and Rosie Dumbarrell purchased the property with the intent of living here, and that is still their intent. They're going to move their family to Barwon Heads, and they have 4 children, and their origin is Melbourne. And so they want to maintain their friendships with their friends and house their family, and it's a growing family, and that explains the size of the house. I think You may see more of this in the future because people are choosing to live in your fine region. For all we first explored renovating the original building because it is a good piece of architecture, well built, and we concur with your comments. However, we discovered that you can't build adjacent to a rammed earth building because they crack, and when they crack, you can't repair them. And it was at that point Paul made the expensive decision to demolish the building in design and apply for a new residence to house his. To the architecture, I work around Australia, and Australia is a truly multicultural society, as we know, and my clients are multicultural, and they aspire to live in architecture that has been influenced from many regions of the world. The golf club, for instance, is American in style, and my design's been referred to as Santa Fe. I didn't set out to design a Santa Fe building, but it's been characterised as that, and so therefore I respect that characterisation. So that too is an American style. Along because of the materials we've chosen to build the building of the traditional shapes and forms of the building, particularly the pitched roof, and I put to you the arches. While there may not be many examples of arches in of course I'm going to celebrate the design, so I won't go any further along that. Until we understood the feelings and the moods and the views of the local residents of Bowen Heads and the golf club. And after that was established and objections were lodged, we read them all respectfully, and we've heard them today, and they're different to our views, but we respect your views. To meet with because they are our direct neighbour, and they too shared the same sense of responsibility that we felt towards them. It was one of the most rewarding meetings I've ever been to, with an objector to one of my designs. And we sat there, we presented the design, we presented every facet of it, and at the duration of that meeting they decided to withdraw their objection. And it was agreed before we left that they would withdraw their objection.
If that's all you wish to use of your time, I'm happy to move into the question time. Panel, do we have questions of the applicant, either of them? Councillor Mason.
I've read in the documentation, I think it's been already stated today as well, that despite the fact that you've consulted with the golf club, the general residents, the Bowen Heads Association and so on, I've read in the notes, could you confirm that you didn't see any purpose in discussing with these others?
No, I think my... only just went to meet with the club. My chance again, I would.
Councillors, just to further the comments made by Rob at that point in relation to consultation. So at the conclusion of the public notice period, and we received circa 46 objections, I had quite a proactive productive conversation with the planning department about whether it was appropriate to have a consultation session. And I'm happy to also have this affirmed by the planning department, but I'll say it was a unanimous decision to not go down a consultation session. And given the volume of objections, that's a typical outcome of council. But again, happy to have that affirmed by others.
Can we affirm that?
From my recollection, it was, we spoke about how many objections were there, and it was decided that it would.
In general, council does encourage, the planning department that is, we do encourage consultation where we certainly can. We know it's a non-statutory requirement, but a lot of the staff also live in the municipality as well and understand that it's something that we've done for some time. As it's been expressed, if they had their time again, I believe they would have done it. But it's been a difficult time during the last few years of getting meeting venues together and then having to have them cancelled during COVID as well. So we've been mindful of those circumstances when we've had large numbers of objections.
Thank you. All good, Jim?
Could there have been room to modify the design so that it would have created a greater acclaim in the community?
A question that requires a subjective answer. I know the project architect is here and he can provide items of clarification. Where it needs to start, councillor, is why are we before council this evening, and it's under the bushfire management overlay and the heritage overlay. We're not in an area of neighbourhood character. We're not in an area of significant landscape. We're not in an area of design and development. As was correctly pointed out, this is one of the isolated examples within Barwon Heads where such character overlays are not applicable to the subject site and the assessment tools of council. So, call that that's a statutory response to your question. It does require an element of subjectivity in how you respond to that, and in many respects, I'm probably not equipped to provide that answer to you, councillor.
Birch, second chair, if you wish.
Oh, I might be able to shed some light on it. When we commission to design a new building, we assemble a team of experts because our responsibility as an architect is to comply with your planning code, ensure my client's brief is satisfied, and many other objectives. And by assembling a team of experts, which included Bryce Rayworth, who's one of Victoria's most celebrated conservation architects, we seek advice from them as to our design during the design process. It's not something that we justify afterwards. It's a design that's crafted with the advice of our experts, and that's how the design evolved. It was tested. The right solution for my client and an appropriate solution for the land upon which it was built. But it is subjective, so I don't want to challenge other people's views of the architecture. They're entitled to them, but that's how the architecture was created.
Other questions on the panel? If not, we'll move into the deliberation. Councillors are allowed to make comment now if they want. However, I'll probably ask for a recommendation to be moved and then comment can be made unless any councillor wishes to make a comment first. That being the case, I'll ask for a mover of a recommendation.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would like to move an alternate recommendation, if I may.
You may. Do you have a seconder?
Would you like me to read it out to you first? Yes.
You have a seconder. Thank you, Councillor Mason. Thank
you,
you.
Councillor Mason.
Councillor Asher, please.
Okay, thank you. The alternate recommendation is that the responsible authority, having considered all matters which the Planning and Environment Act 1987 requires it to consider, decides to refuse to grant a planning permit for the demolition of 2 dwellings, associated outbuildings and fences, and construction of a dwelling and fences at 2 and 4 Stevens Parade, Barwon Heads on the following grounds. One, that the proposal does not comply with the planning policy framework at A, clause 11.036L01, the Bellarine Peninsula, in that it does not protect the unique character of Barwon Heads as a coastal village located within a sensitive environment and significant landscape setting. And B, clause 15.031L, Heritage Conservation Incorporated Document HO1650, golf links, in that it does not promote a dwelling design that draws on traditional architectural characteristics. Point 2, that the proposal does not accord with the Heritage Decision guidelines of clause 43.018, given the location, bulk, form and appearance of the proposed dwelling will adversely affect the significance of the heritage place. And the third point is that the proposal does not comply with clause 65, decision guidelines of the Greater Geelong Planning Scheme, in that the proposed development inappropriately affects the environment and amenity of the area. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Asher. Do you wish to speak on that further?
Look, I think there's no question that this is a stunning and eye-catching development proposal, and I commend the architect and the applicant for that. And unfortunately, that's the issue in this location, and I appreciate the response to most of the policy concerns and the permit triggers, but the big concern for the local residents here is that it doesn't protect the unique character of the neighbourhood. And I'm proposing this alternative in response to a clear push from the community, and there's only 3 here, but we've certainly heard from more than 3, from the community to retain the local coastal character, and I ask my colleagues to consider it in that context. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Asher. Councillor Mason.
In addition, furthermore, I'm surprised at the recommendation by the Heritage Advisor. I find it difficult. I don't feel convinced by the arguments put forward. I've seen stronger arguments made in other situations. I remain unconvinced about that recommendation. And that's the main thing, I suppose, as well as the character of the neighbourhood. And in fact, I'm disappointed that more efforts aren't done to consult in the first place. I'm disappointed if someone's going to come and live in a community, they might want to be part of the community and not start off with some angst in the first instance. So that's a subjective thing, but I would like to see more efforts at consultation and conciliation in the first instance. And as I said, I remain unconvinced about the heritage recommendations.
Thank you, Councillor Mason. Any other councillors care to comment? Okay, Councillor Nelson.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I've got a question to the officers before I make comment. This area is not in the heritage overlay area, is it?
This area is in the heritage overlay.
House is not. No, because it's only 20 years old.
Like a precinct.
Yeah, it's in a precinct. It's not part of the. Yeah. Okay. Thanks. So
Not individually.
I just want to make sure that that's right before I say anything, because for me, this is a single dwelling. It's not a heritage building. It's not part of It's not part of the Barwon Heads Village. It's a separate street away from the village. Certainly not to my taste, but I'm not building it. So I think with regard to Councillor Asher's alternate, it says it does not protect the unique character of Barwon Heads. I know there's a lot of modern houses in the village of Barwon Heads, in some of them, and they're not to my taste either, but that's not what we're here for. So I certainly can't support the alternate recommendation. I think bought the house, and it's in a significant spot of Barwon Heads, but it's not part of the village. It's quite separate. It's very separate. It's a very, very quiet road. It's a dead-end road. Which is listed. I don't see that there's anything wrong with it. It's just not to my taste. That's not a planning consideration. That's it for me.
Councillor Nelson. If there's no other councillors to comment, I'll now Deputy Mayor Aiken?
Look, it's an interesting one. I came here with an open mind and I've sat on the fence listening to everybody tonight. The initial impression was the bulk and size of the property was actually quite large, but it's been explained to us it is a family property. And in fact, when you look at the street, it probably, what does happen is if this house gets built, the other ones will probably be converted into something like this as well too, because it seems to be a unique strip. It's not, which is not very much reflective of Barwon Heads. But I think it is important that we have to look at the character of the area, and the area doesn't have a house of this bulk, from what I can see from the information that's been presented before us. And because I am sitting on the fence, I always tend to then lean towards what the local ward councillors actually believe, and two of them have strongly said that they don't support the application, and I think that will persuade me tonight to respect the judgment of the local ward councillors that have a far greater understanding of the locality and also the impact that this proposal would make on that local area as well too. So I'll support both the Ballerine councillors tonight. Yeah.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Aiken. With that, I'm happy to put to the vote. All good? No, just a second. All good. With that, happy to put that to the vote. All those in favour of Councillor Ashner's alternate recommendation? Those against? The alternate recommendation is carried. Thank you, everybody here in attendance and watching online live streaming. That calls to a close of planning meeting 227 at 6:36 p.m.